So welcome. This presentation is called Helping Our Justice Engaged Youth Reenter Our Traditional High School Classrooms. And I'm super excited to be at this JEDI conference. This is so neat to be part of a first of something. And this past year, I've had the privilege to be part of first for an assortment of different projects and different wonderful civic engagement type of project-based learning. And so it's been a really neat opportunity. And I'm so glad to be able to share some of the work that I've done with all of you. One thing that we do, so I'm a Justice Family Education Coordinator at the Santa Clara County Office of Education. And what I do is I run a program where I help support and give one-on-one coaching for academic pathways and career readiness and college readiness, okay, of course, to our incarcerated parents and also the incarcerated children with incarcerated parents. And so I do a lot of work with our juvenile justice community. At Santa Clara County Office of Education, one thing that we do within the leadership team is that we participate in something called the Clifton Strength Finders. And what that is a way to gather 34 themes of different strengths that a person could add to a team. Of course, in this situation, it's the team of educators. So I wanted to put the top five up here so that everyone understands and knows how I learn or how some of my themes of my strengths. And I hope they're called the 34 Clifton Strength Finders. So go ahead and check that out online. But my strengths are individualization, so I can appreciate the uniqueness in every person that I meet. Ideation, which is that I can refine my creativity to inspire and to energize myself and others, which I'm sure you can see while I'm talking. I'm an activator, so I'm a catalyst for when others are stuck, that I'm able to make decisions and to get going on different things. I have the strength of context, which of course is all of my training in the social studies and finding value in remembering the past so that we can change our future. And then finally, adaptability. And adaptability was one, I took these strength finders many years ago, and adaptability was not in my top five. But I do believe that working in jails where you have to be able to adapt all day, every day, because inside of those facilities, oftentimes they're dealing with triage moments. And so you need to be able to be flexible as an educator in there to be able to reach all of the students, but then also understands that we're working within limitations. So adaptability is something that I've grown into that strength. So the JEDI conference that we're doing here, I've just broken this down into a couple of categories. So we're doing obviously a professional development, right, for those who work with youth and also at all stages of life. And so we want to kind of focus on an understanding of importance of people's perspectives, which of course in the social studies is something that's really important, is a foundation to what we do. So JEDI plans in schools are crucial so that we can support all of our students. And that's really important for the equal access and equal opportunity to fair and appropriate education. And then finally, of course, the field of social studies can play such an important role in these students' lives. And we will talk about an example of that shortly. So this workshop or this presentation right now, we're going to talk a little bit about the data of what are some of the commonalities between some of our at-risk youth. We're going to be looking at a couple of the best practice strategies for mainstream social studies classroom teachers to be able to help their justice engaged youth. And then also we'll look at an example of what this actually can look like when it's played out in the classroom. Our lens, of course, of our JEDI is going to be justice, right? So justice sits at the core of social studies education, acting to develop citizens and other members of society who understand how to contribute positively within the school, community, state, nation, and the world. So some of our essential questions that we will be looking at here are, what are those unique needs? Are there patterns in the data? And how can I use social studies in a way that is going to support storytelling, lived experience, and contribute to the success of all students? And that actually includes our justice engaged students. Some of our enduring understandings that aren't just about justice engaged youth. When all students make a personal connection to hard histories and the valued resiliency of living through adverse childhood experiences, when they find positive youth influencers within their schools, with their teachers and other school personnel, they make personal connections to those helping guide through the development of sense of purpose work. And for the justice engaged youth in particular, it actually reduces their likelihood of recidivism because now they feel accountable to somebody who they know cares about them, who is not a family member and who is not somebody that they don't trust. So I've been talking about justice engaged youth now and how to help them transition back into our classrooms for a couple of years now, because I've been doing a lot of research, and the past 5 years I've been working within the correctional institutions, detention centers, and so on, to be able to really work with and coach, in particular, my transitional age youth. They're called the TAY, transitional age youth. Which basically would sort of be the equivalent of like perhaps a high school senior through a freshman in college type of age group. But oftentimes when I do these presentations, there aren't truly that many people that actually come to these types of presentations. And one of the reasons why is because many people don't believe that they have any justice engaged youth at their schools. And that is something that I wanted to go ahead and lay out here very quickly, because that is a myth. We all have justice engaged youth and or justice engaged families at all of our schools. And oftentimes because of laws, we aren't actually able to access that information. Some of the time we'll only know that because the student has offered that information to us. But at this point, best practices tells us, and the data tells us, that we have justice engaged families in all of our classrooms. So I wanted to just briefly show us here through this slide exactly what the numbers of youth are in the country. So every day, over 48,000 youth are held in facilities that are away from their houses as a result of juvenile or criminal justice involvement. And you can see here where our students are lining up in here. So you can see in detention centers that has the largest number of close to 17,000. In addition to that, you can see what the crimes are for these. And some of these, when you look at it, for example, drugs, right? That's something that we need to be able to deal with in school. That number, that's something that we can greatly reduce by simply talking about it through the educational lens in our schools. And that is also JEDI. So you can see here all these different places where our students are living. And then when we think about if they're coming out of locked facilities and then re-entering our classrooms, do we really think that they are going to be able to transition for spending months inside of a facility with walls to the classroom with open air space? It's really hard for them to do that without any guidance. And teachers have a responsibility to be able to do that. In this slide as well, I did want to be able to also give you the statistics of why we know that there are students and families that are justice engaged in all of our classrooms. So the percentage of U.S. inmates who are parents with children, including more than that include more than 120,000 mothers and 1.1 million fathers. So you can see here, 54% of U.S. prison inmates are parents. And that's really important because mass incarceration and the school to prison pipeline lends itself to generational incarceration. So this number here will impact our students. In addition to that, when you look here, 1 in every 28 children, or 3.6%, has a parent incarcerated. That is a total of 2.7 million children. And that is up from 500,000 children in 1980. Again, that is about mass incarceration. And finally, when we break it down with the numbers, you can see here exactly what is happening with our communities. If we break it down by race, African American children, 1 in 9, or 11.4% of African American children have a parent that is currently or formerly incarcerated in their lives. So right there, if you look around your classroom, and if you have 9 African-American children in your classroom, then we know that there is a justice impacted family, and if not directly, then indirectly. So because of that one, or because within the Hispanic children, the 1 in 28, or even with white children, 1 in 50 something, I can't see the rest of the number right now, that those children are living with one of the known adverse childhood experiences, which is having a parent lost to incarceration. Because of these numbers, and because we know that there could be just one, JEDI and those protocols and procedures have to be able to happen. Because at the end of the day, it's that one who needs free, appropriate education and equal access to being in our mainstream classrooms. Okay, so what are, in fact, the commonalities with some of our justice-engaged youth? Most of our justice-engaged youth have a number of what is called ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. Now, these experiences are experiences that are so stressful that they have the ability to create something called toxic stress. And that toxic stress can be handed down from generation to generation, and it manifests itself in an assortment of different ways. So here you can see that there are 3 different realms of ACEs that happen. In the tree realm, the household realm, that's really where I find the core of our justice-engaged youth have more adverse childhood experiences within the household. And that then translates to coming out into the community and continuing to have negative experiences under the age of 18. And then finally, there are things that we can't control, like environmental disasters. Household, we can control. Each one of us is able to do that in our own households. And if it isn't happening in our students' households, then we need to figure out a way for it to happen in some sort of way in our classrooms. Now, the question then becomes, do adverse childhood experiences impact the academics of our students? Now, adverse childhood experiences are not limited to our justice-engaged youth, obviously. This happens to any person under the age of 18 with these certain experiences in their lives. So this here, I really like this graph, although it is a little confusing, so I'm going to explain it. But this looks at, a study was done out of Spokane, Washington, in which they looked at the percentage of students who had at least one known adverse childhood experience, and then what that translated to as far as having one known academic concern. And those academic concerns, by the way, turn into either diagnosed or often undiagnosed for our justice-engaged youth learning disabilities. So you can see here. So the percentage of students that have no known adverse childhood experiences present, 34 of them present at least one academic concern. With one reported adverse childhood experience, so remember that was 54%, is with at least one known adverse childhood experience, that they then are likely to have one or more academic concerns. With 2 reported adverse childhood experiences, it went up to 71% of having one or more academic concerns, and 3 or more adverse childhood experiences, 80% of those who reported 3 or more adverse childhood experiences had at least one known academic concern. And this right here tells us that we can predict that if students are coming in with 3 or more adverse childhood experiences, then we know that the likelihood is that they will present at least one academic concern. And that is something that we as teachers have a responsibility to address every day in our daily learning objectives, in our curriculum, and in our lesson planning. So when I'm working with our students, again, when I'm asking them for commonalities, I ask them 3 different questions. 1, were you ever suspended or expelled from school? And if you were, in what grade and for what reason? 2, is there anything that your teacher could have done to, that a teacher or somebody else could have done or said to help you stay engaged with school rather than dropping out? And then finally, 3, what is your number 1 barrier for being confident that you can re-enter your school successfully? And so here are their answers. Number one, so they were suspended or expelled in middle school, and oftentimes they were expelled for fighting or not being able to know or understand their emotions, or they had not learned any skills in learning how to emotionally regulate. Two, was there anything a teacher could have said? Across the board, every one of my students has said, make the history about me, make the books about me. Let us read books where people are being successful, who look like them, who act like them, who talk like them, and who have been successful in getting out of the predicaments that they're in, or being able to re-enter even though they're presenting 8 or more adverse childhood experiences. And then finally, this is our robust list of what these barriers are. I've heard from my students a lack of family support, a lack of relationships with trusted adults and positive youth influencers like teachers or coaches, the foster care system, gangs, which is a particular problem here in California, unhealthy relationships, addiction and substance abuse disorders, and mental health needs. That's a long list. And you might be thinking to yourself right now, how are we going to be able to help as teachers, as social studies in JEDI implementation? How are we going to help our students get through these adverse childhood experiences? So there are these significant barriers towards this success. And one of the most significant barriers is that our students drop out of school because of a lack of access to education support, or a lack of support for learning disabilities, disengagement from curriculum, and so on. So now I just wanted us to talk about, so there are some commonalities there, right? I would like to give us just a couple of really quick tools that you will be able to implement right away in your classrooms or at your school to create a school climate around JEDI and JEDI practices, but that are also trauma informed. So here we have the do's and don'ts of being trauma informed and compassionate. So one is that we want to create the safe space, and our students need to be able to feel like they can express themselves without getting into trouble. And sometimes those safe spaces get violated because, let's say we have a student re-entering who's wearing an ankle monitor. Some of my students show off the ankle monitor. Others are so embarrassed by the ankle monitor that it actually affects where they sit, what clothes they wear, and all of that. So we need to create a safe space for things like that. And we can do that from changing our curriculum and talking about what all of that is about. Establish predictability. We need routines. Routines are so important for our young students as well. Schedules. We need to build a sense of trust. This is going to be important, and we'll talk about that one in a second. We want to offer choices of empowerment. So through social emotional learning and project-based learning, we can offer choices that allow the students to empower themselves to be able to become civically engaged and positive contributors to our democratic society. We want to help them learn how to stay regulated. And so we can do that in our classrooms. One trick of the trade that I used to have was, I had read somewhere that if you had Jolly Ranchers, and if students were beginning to elevate in anger or whatever, frustration, that if a student eats a Jolly Rancher, the Jolly Rancher is so shockingly sour that it messes up the frontal lobe. Okay, so now you've got a bunch of things going on, and all of a sudden the student's mind goes to, oh my goodness, this is so sour. And all of a sudden, all of that focus, because all of their sensory processes are going into something that is sour. And all of a sudden, about 6 seconds later, which there is a science around 6 seconds, they are able to bring it back down. Now, I know that some of our schools can't give out Jolly Ranchers all the time, but it's a good trick of the trade to teach our students so that they know when they're out and about on the weekends or later on at home, that if they're eating sour candy, that actually is going to help them self-regulate. I'm sure everyone's thrilled that I just promoted eating candy all the time. So there's only one thing that we don't want to do in this situation, and that we don't want to punish kids for behaviors that are trauma symptoms. We also don't want to punish students based on their ability to sit down and be able to not move during class time, right? It's out of their control. If our students have ADD, ADHD, which a number of our justice engaged youth do, and that's the reason why they were thrown out of their classes, suspended or expelled. They couldn't sit still. They had to continue to move, right? And so what we need to be able to do is not punish them for that. We need to be able to allow them the space. If a student needs to pace back in the classroom in order to answer our, constitutional law question, right, then they can pace. Anyway, so it's creating environments like that that are really, really important and that we can do immediately. Okay, so how do we implement JEDI practices on a much larger scale? We know that children are shaped by the interactions that they have in the world, with the adults around them, and with how they make meaning of their experiences, no matter where they are. Poverty, racism, and other structural barriers can really take away the opportunities and the outcomes that we want for these students in positive ways. Now, one way that we can do this on a whole school level through JEDI is adopting social emotional rubrics and building them into our lesson plan. So in California, we have something called the castles, and it's a particular framework that we can use. Now, I implement this into every single classroom that I do. So when I am creating curriculum, this right here is at the core. And so an example would be that we start big about a current issue. We bring it all the way into, let's say, the First Amendment, and then we bring it out again into this project-based learning. We ask our students to be able to be interactive, professional, and to be able to also provide restorative justice when things go wrong. So implementation of social emotional learning is crucial to the success of all of our students, but in particular, our justice engaged students. Okay, also, we now have the data that very clearly shows that sense of purpose work and trusted adult youth influencers combined together actually change the trajectory in a positive and healthy way for all of our students. But in particular, this helps our justice engaged youth so much. Having a positive view of the future is crucial. And when I ask some of my students who basically have gone into jail at age 15 and basically spent all of their teenage years inside, they really had a hard time and struggled with finding trusted adult youth influencers. But in particular, their sense of purpose was so almost like it wasn't even there. One of my students had said to me, well, I never had a sense of purpose because I figured I'd be dead by the time I was 16 years old. So why would I come up with a sense of purpose for that? Why would I waste my time with that when I know it's never going to come true? So that was heartbreaking to hear. Anyway, so our sense of purpose work is really crucial in this, but justice engaged youth cannot access the sense of purpose work that has been built out because they cannot access the first step of understanding purpose. So if they don't understand the words to begin with, they're not going to be able to develop this. So even if you're saying sense of purpose in your classroom, you actually have to define this in a way that it allows all students, including our learning disability students, to understand what sense of purpose is. I just want to give a shout out to an organization called Kids in Common. Kids in Common puts together with an assortment of other community based organizations. They put together a children's data book in which in Santa Clara County, in which we look at what is happening with our youth and whether or not they are set up for success in an assortment of different categories. And so one of the things that they did look at was whether or not students had a positive view of their future. And so you can take a look here at these numbers and the percentage, right? So in the Latino communities, 62% of the respondents had a positive view of their future, and 46% had a sense of purpose or understood what that was. So I don't really like those statistics. I am hoping that you don't really like those statistics either. These numbers need to be at 100%, everyone. Every student deserves to have 100% of a positive view of their future and sense of purpose work. Okay. So we've talked about what the commonalities are and some of the statistics with that. We've talked about the fact that we all now are fully aware that we have justice engaged students in our schools without us actually having the document that says that. And we know if not them, then justice engaged families. We also then looked at as teachers, as positive youth influencers, and also looking at sense of purpose work and how teachers are crucial to that. And now what I would like to end with is an example of what our JEDI work can look like in schools, and in particular within the social studies. So I had the most amazing experience this year when one of the principals of our school came and handed me a brochure that was about the seal of civic engagement in the state of California. And it's similar to the bilingual seal that goes onto a diploma. But there were certain criteria points in which a high school senior could earn the seal of civic engagement on their diploma. And I thought to myself as I looked through the brochure, hey, wait a second. I have an incarcerated client who actually is meeting all of the criteria point, is an incredible artist, and oftentimes questions, how do I preserve my culture when I am not part of the culture of power? And how he does that is through visual arts and social justice through visual arts. And then also through his provocative artist statements that get the audience who is looking at his artwork to really think about what is going on for our incarcerated youth, and then those who actually come out of incarceration are trying to re-enter their school communities. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video because I am thrilled to tell you that my client, our incarcerated youth, he won the seal of civic engagement along with some other students, but he was the only student who was incarcerated who won this. And what we did was we had at the Santa Clara County Office of Education, we pride ourselves on being a premier service organization and also solutions-based approaches through education. And so to help our justice engaged youth, we can't just walk into the facilities and say, here's our magic wand and everyone has to agree with us. But in education, when we teach education, when we teach civic engagement, that is how we change systems and policies. So I'm going to go ahead and play this and then talk a little bit about this. But this was the video that we showed at the Santa Clara County Office of Education Civic Engagement Expo, which happened just a few weeks ago. And what they did was they put together a video that highlighted two different ways of giving this seal of civic engagement and what those projects could look like and what that could do to change students' lives. So I'm going to go ahead and play this right now, and then we'll talk about it for a few minutes, and then I'll take any questions if there are questions.
On September 10, 2020, the California Department of Education approved the criteria for the California State Seal of Civic Engagement to encourage and create pathways for pupils in elementary and secondary schools to become civically engaged in democratic governmental institutions at the local, state, and national levels. The Santa Clara County Office of Education raised community awareness of the State Seal of Civic Engagement at Power of Democracy events, created an implementation toolkit, and developed local criteria for students in our special programs to earn the seal. The criteria are written to ensure that no kindergarten through 12th grade student is excluded from an opportunity to earn the California State Seal of Civic Engagement based on academic ability, alternative school settings, or unique or unconventional expressions of civic engagement. The Santa Clara County Office of Education created equity and inclusion-focused local criteria for our special programs. These include special education, Opportunity Youth Academy, and alternative education. We are proud to announce that several students in our special programs will be the first to receive the State Seal of Civic Engagement as a result of meeting the 5 criteria and their dedication to civics. Let's take a look at some examples of the work. A small team of students at Hester School spread seeds of joy in the community by painting ceramic flower pots, planting flowers, and delivering them to spread seeds of joy at Lenzen Gardens, a tranquil housing community for seniors and persons with disabilities. The seniors were very happy and asked the students to come back.
I'm proud of our students at Hester for spreading seeds of joy throughout our community.
How can I preserve my culture when I'm not in the culture of power? In many communities throughout California and the United States, this perpetuous cycle of incarceration is what's tearing apart communities and families. We are conditioned to believe that we aren't in the culture of power and that we have to minimize ourselves to fit the stigmas placed on us by others. I enjoy breaking through the barriers that are placed on me, either through societal expectations or the minimalization of one's identity. I believe as a young man of Chicano and indigenous descent who is currently incarcerated, I'm continuously fighting and advocating for my raza and community. I personally choose to encapsulate my cultural upbringing and traditions through my artwork and activism. I choose to reclaim my power by advocating for my peers through the Youth Advisory Council, the SCCOE Student Board, and educating others on our rights and the importance of them. We all have the opportunity to be in the culture of power. How will you make a difference?
For more information on implementing the State Seal of Civic Engagement to help students make a difference, check out our website today.
I love watching this over and over again because it's so neat to see a client be able to take this project and begin to change. It's so cool to watch our students change before our eyes. And what was so neat about this was that this student in particular was presented on recognition on the local, county, state, and national levels for the work that he has already done. And this really goes to show exactly what the social studies can actually provide for our students to change their pathways. I know that this student's life has been changed by being able to be one of the winners of this award. And so it's plans like this, it's innovation like this that really allows places like the Santa Clara County Office of Education to be able to promote civic engagement. And we know that having our youth then be civically engaged not only helps everyone, but also helps our justice engaged youth. So I'm going to go ahead and I don't know if there's any questions or things that need to be in the chat, but I wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you. If you are interested in my contact information, here it is. But then also if you point your camera at the QR code, you can also get my contact information. This is such important work that we are doing. And the idea of implementing JEDI provides equal access to equal education. And we have to do that. It's not just the law. It's not just because education warrants that. It's because we feel compelled as people to ensure that our leaders and even our next door neighbors are prepared to deal with life and to be able to be civically engaged and positive contributors to our society. So thank you so much. And I will go ahead and stop sharing now. And then if there's any questions, I can answer those.
I love this work. It's an easy sell. I believe in what you're doing. And I know in the social sciences how often this idea of having so much content to cover and various other barriers can come up where it's hard or feels hard for teachers to maybe live their values, bring them to life. What barriers have you encountered as you try to bring this work to the district level? And how might people think about learning from that as they bring this change to other places?
Okay, so that is excellent questions. There's a number of different things. So I have hit a number of different barriers. Sometimes I like to call them walls, but actually they're really not walls. And somehow or other, we need to like get through some of these barriers. But Katie, you're right. I have found that there are certain instances where there's a ceiling, which is really hard to go above. And so, or to break through that ceiling. And so what I always try to do is if we can't go through it, maybe we can figure out how to swim around it. Actually, there was one leader that I remember talking to, and he's very solutions-based approach. And that's also what we need is you need leadership who are willing to take this risk, willing to be able to say, you know, I'm going to speak the truth. The school to prison pipeline is not okay. And if we are not actually solving the problem, then we are actually contributing to the school to prison pipeline, which most schools, that's not part of their value system. So there are multiple people and teams that basically, I hate to say it, but they have to be convinced that, and that's why I usually come with so much data is because, and like I was saying before, some of the barriers are things like, somebody once said to me in a presentation, oh, well, we only have white students here, so we know we don't have justice engaged youth here. And I was thinking to myself, that's these are some of the barriers, right? This was a teacher. This is a regular teacher who is talking about how, and we saw that statistic where we know that that simply isn't going to be true. We know we have justice engaged youth. And so from the teacher being able to recognize trainings, becoming trauma informed, to the administration choosing to say, we are going to do this. There are sometimes administrations that kind of don't want to, you know, ruffle feathers because they got a good thing going. And I totally understand that. But at the end of the day, I heard our keynote speaker this morning when they did the opening of our JEDI conference. And I was totally inspired by that because there are some days I literally go home and just sort of feel like I just bashed my head against the wall multiple times and I don't think anybody heard me. Although at the end of the day, I will tell you, as long as my clients hear me, I'm doing my job right. So, but sometimes I come home and it is hard, right? It is hard. And also dealing with adverse childhood experiences, especially with those incarcerated, I'm dealing with averages of like 8, not just 1 adverse childhood experience, right? And so those are hard. Convincing students that they can do this is hard. That takes a lot of energy and a lot of work. And so I will say, once we start to get that crack through these barriers, we can't stop pushing. And that pretty much was also what our keynote speaker said this morning, right? We have a responsibility as teachers, we have a responsibility as educators, and we can't let this go anymore. Like, enough is enough. We can't do it. The data is there. Best practices are there. And now we need to figure out how to deal with this. So, Katie, that is a great, great question. I do believe that JEDI and the implementations of JEDI and the teams that actually work on JEDI are where we can get this done. I also believe, and I get this sense that you are a history teacher and a history teacher's coach, that it takes people like you who are willing to be in presentations like this, to learn about it, and then to be able to, you know, go forth and acknowledge, even in the face of people saying, well, social studies is too political right now. So, and I just wish education wasn't politicized in this type of way, right? It's used in a way where sometimes, you know, some people try and use it in a divisive way, and that's just so not okay. So thank you so much for that question. And another thing is, I would say, let's team up. So I hope that people that are watching this, listening to it, watch it later on in a different virtual venue, that we actually are able to team up and be able to do this together, because we need all these people at the table. If Katie, you're at the table, then we also need people like me at the table, but then we also need the lived experience of the students' lives at the table. So we need them to be present when we're talking about this. And actually, just really quickly, I was looking at something, I think it was some, picture that came through on LinkedIn, but it was so powerful to look at it. I'm trying to pull up the quote now, because I really, really felt like it was truly what I think that we're at right now as an educator, and for me with my justice engaged youth. The quote was, "Choose people who will say your name in a room full of opportunities." I know that the people who are in here right now, I am choosing to say your names in the room full of opportunities. I am willing to tell you my students' names, my students' stories, my students' experiences in rooms full of opportunities. And that's exactly what got to happen for this client recently. Was we said his name in a room full of opportunities, and we let him speak for himself. And that was an amazing experience. So I think one of the things that I hope we all do is that we want to be able to, be around teachers, be around students, be around educators, be around different organizations who are going to say your name and say our work and say JEDI in a room full of opportunities so that people can hear it.